All right, so good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Miller, and I am coming to you tonight from Durham, North Carolina. Happy to be here, hosting this free prep hour. So before we get into tonight's content, there are a couple of public service announcements. We do these free prep hours a couple times a month, and if you're interested in some of our other free options, you can go to our website, manhattanprep.com, LSAT and resources, and I'll put these links in the chat window at the end of the session. If you're watching us on YouTube, these links should be right there below the YouTube video. And if you're here tonight live with us, then I'll put them in the chat window at the end. But we have a lot of really good free resources on our website, a lot that you can take advantage of to help you prepare for the LSAT. You can also attend session one of any of our classes, our in-person classes or our live online classes. You can attend session one of any classes for free. So like I said, I'll put those more information about that in the chat window at the end of the session if you're interested in any of those free resources. So tonight's agenda, we're going to talk about the logical reasoning section of the LSAT. Last couple of free prep hours that I led, we talked about reading comprehension. And I used to say that reading comprehension was my favorite section. It kind of changes. I actually like them all in terms of teaching. I like logical reasoning though. Logical reasoning is kind of quick hit, one question, minute and 20 seconds, 2 minutes or so, and then you move on. Whereas logical reasoning logic games and reading comprehension are a little bit more of a time investment. You know, you have those just 4 games or 4 passages, and you're going to spend some time with each of them. And there's kind of strategy within each game or within each passage. But logical reasoning, it's just kind of one at a time, knock them down, and you know, kind of focusing on just what's going on with that one question in the moment. So tonight, specifically in the logical reasoning section, we're going to talk about what I like to call LSAT speak or LSATese. It's the special language that the test writers have developed just for the LSAT. It's not actually a special language. It's not just very formal language that they use sometimes. It's actually language that's intended to be vague or abstract. It's intended to be confusing, right? It's intended to slow you down. And especially you'll see this language in the answer choices. Especially with flaw questions. We're going to focus tonight on flaw questions, and we're going to use the June 2007 LSAT because that is the free test that's published by LSAC. So anybody can download that from the LSAC website. So if you're following along on the video or you're here tonight with us live and you want to follow along, we'll be using questions from that test. If you want to go back and review afterwards, it's a great thing to do is go back and look at these questions again tomorrow, review them, and see what you remember. And I'm just curious, for those of you who are here live tonight, and I'll change the chat window so your chats just go to me. Give me in 1 or 2 words, 2 or 3 words, is your experience with the LSAT? Have you just started? Have you been studying, taken an LSAT already? Everybody in the chat window, if you would, for those who are here with us live tonight, what have you been doing with the LSAT? What is your familiarity with the LSAT? Okay. Okay, we have a few different levels. Some people are beginners, some people are studying for a couple months. Great. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into a couple of these questions. Before we do that, let's talk quickly about what an argument is. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because if you've been studying for the LSAT, then hopefully you're familiar with specifically the meaning of an argument on the LSAT. What do the test writers mean when they talk about arguments? When you're looking at a logical reasoning question and you see the word argument, what does that mean? If you're not familiar with that, then you can look up, I would say go back and look at our free prep hours from July. We did a couple back then, a couple back in July. They're on our YouTube channel. And we specifically talk about arguments. What is an argument on the LSAT? What do they mean by an argument? And what are you doing with arguments on the LSAT? How do you break an argument down into its component parts? And how do you debate arguments on the LSAT? So both of those things are important to be able to do. About 80% of all logical reasoning questions involve your understanding of arguments. So we're not going to go into too much detail of what an argument is tonight. Again, you can go back and watch those earlier Free Prep Hour videos if you want more of an explanation of what an argument is or how we debate arguments. But basic, simple definition, argument is the use of a supporting premise to justify a conclusion. Conclusion is the main point of the argument. If I say, oh, Sam, we're talking about this person, Sam, won't go to the beach this weekend. I'm making a prediction. We don't know if that's true or false. I'm making a prediction about what Sam's going to do this weekend. The evidence that I'm giving you, the premise that I'm giving you to support that, is that Sam hasn't completed any of his homework yet. So this is always what you're going to see in an argument. It's some kind of an opinion supported by some type of evidence. That's what we mean when we talk about an argument on the LSAT, specifically LSAT arguments. Other definitions of arguments, it's not the only definition of an argument, but that's the specific one that we're using on the LSAT when we talk about arguments and logical reasoning. So I'm going to show you an LSAT argument. This is from the June 2007 prep test, section 3, question 8. And I want you to go ahead and give this question a shot. Just take a look at this. We'll spend a couple minutes looking at it and let you guys get an idea of what this is all about. See if you can come up with an answer. All right, let's talk about this. I'll tell you what. How about if you would, Rachel, if you would like, if you want to hop on the microphone, you should be able to see a button at the bottom of your window there, the little toolbar, and you should see a button that says unmute. So Rachel, would you like to help me out with this? If I look at this question, it says the advertisement's reasoning is most vulnerable to criticism. What do they mean by the advertisement's reasoning? And if you don't want to hop on the mic, that's fine. But Rachel, if you want to, do you want to hop on the mic and tell me, what do they mean by the advertiser's reasoning, the advertisement's reasoning?
All right. So the advertiser's reasoning would be like, I guess their advertisement would be that they're the most effective.
Mm-hmm.
Their reasoning would be how they could justify saying that.
How can they justify saying that?
Because 99% of the customers preferred the Fabric Soft Towel.
99% of the customers preferred the Fabric Soft Towel. Okay. Is that it? Is that the whole argument? Is that the whole line of reasoning that they're providing?
No, I would think like pretty much everything before that last sentence would be the reasoning.
Yeah, so there's some other stuff going on here. All right. So, this is when you're going to answer these questions, logical reasoning questions. First thing I always recommend that you do, I'm a big fan of always reading the question stem first. Read the question first, because that's going to give you information about what your job is on this particular question. You're going to have different jobs on different questions. It's not always going to be the same. So when they talk about reasoning or an argument, that's premise and conclusion. So Rachel, you were right. The conclusion of the argument, the main point of the argument is that FabricSoft is the most effective fabric softener available. Okay, that's our conclusion. Well, what's the support? 99% of the consumers preferred the FabricSoft towel. Well, preferred compared to what? So that is a premise. That is support. That is some evidence leading to that conclusion. But notice it says preferred the FabricSoft towel. Well, preferred to what? Okay, they were given one towel washed with FabricSoft and one towel washed without it. So that next line above that is also a premise. Technically, I'm going to say that these first two sentences are what we call background information. So it's great that, I love this question. FabricSoft leaves clothes soft and fluffy. It's like the LSAT test writer decided to write a soft and fluffy question for us to answer. As opposed to some of the pointy, stabby ones they send to us sometimes. So, okay, fresh scent is a delight. Like, we don't care about that. That's not actually telling us why it's the most effective fabric softener. The fact that they used over 100 consumers, okay, great. Like, this is all advertising speak, but as LSAT test takers, we are more interested in the direct support for that conclusion that FabricSoft is the most effective fabric softener. So, notice there's a comparison going on here in this argument. We have the conclusion is that FabricSoft is the most effective fabric softener available, and it's based on the evidence about the consumers preferring the FabricSoft, but preferring compared to what? Well, they were given one towel washed with FabricSoft and one towel without. So it's that comparison that's the basis for the conclusion. That's the basis for our evidence. So when we say the advertisement's reasoning is most vulnerable to criticism, well, that means there's something wrong with this argument. It's not a good argument. It's not a convincing argument. This evidence isn't going to convince us that this conclusion is true. I'm wondering does anybody just looking at this, like, let's forget about the answer choices for a second. Let's pretend you're looking at this for the first time and you haven't even looked at the answer choices yet. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this argument? Does anybody want to hop on the mic and tell me what they see as wrong? Why is this a weak argument? Why is this vulnerable to criticism? How could you criticize this argument? What have they not told us about here? Do you want to answer, Rachel? What's going on here?
Well, their conclusion is that the FabricSoft is the most effective fabric softener available, but they don't mention anything else about any other fabric softeners that are available.
They don't answer anything and tell us about any other fabric softeners that are available. Now, Takara, you said we don't know how many people were surveyed. Well, they do say they conducted a test using over 100 consumers to prove that FabricSoft is best. If they didn't tell us how many, now, it could be that the number, like if they didn't tell us the number, that could be a problem. And maybe that is a problem. FabricSoft is the most, even though they do tell us they conducted a test using over 100 consumers. I like what you're thinking, Takara, because you said, well, I mean, like, even if we do know how many people they used, just because these 100 consumers, maybe, how did they pick these 100 consumers? Were these like 100 friends and family of FabricSoft employees, right? So it's really good that what you're thinking is we could think about the source of the survey, right? And whether it's valid, whether we know anything about the number of people, or even if we do know the number of people, like who are these people? But also, like Rachel was saying, notice what we haven't been told. It's saying FabricSoft is the most effective fabric softener, but it's all based on a comparison between one towel washed with FabricSoft and one towel washed without it. So none of my evidence tells me anything about any other fabric softeners. My evidence is all about Fabric Soft compared to nothing at all. So how do we know? Maybe there's like Fabric Great or some other fabric softener that's better. We don't know from this from this evidence that Fabric Soft is the most effective. So very common flawed comparison, right? It's a very common reasoning structure on the LSAT. It's a very common problem you're going to see in LSAT arguments. So when we look at answer choices, arguments reasoning is most vulnerable to criticism on the grounds that it fails to consider. So the answer choices are all going to describe something that the argument fails to consider. Now, does the argument fail to consider whether any of the consumers tested are allergic to fabric softeners? We could say, yeah, the argument actually does fail to consider that. Is it important? Does it matter? No. It actually, so these are the two questions in flaw questions. When they give you these flaw questions, when we're trying to translate LSAT speak into more approachable language, I guess is what we call it, and language we can understand. Language that's relevant. We're trying to make each answer choice relevant to this argument that we just saw. So is it true that the argument failed? First of all, is it true? That's the first question. Is it true that the argument failed to consider whether any of the consumers tested are allergic to fabric softeners? Yeah, the argument didn't consider that. Is the argument vulnerable to criticism for that reason? No, because we don't care whether any of the consumers are allergic to fabric softeners. The argument's vulnerable to criticism because it's making a conclusion about this stuff being the most effective based on a comparison between Fabric Soft and nothing at all. My evidence doesn't, my premises don't tell me anything about any other fabric softeners that are available. Fabric Soft is more or less harmful to the environment. Again, does the argument fail to consider this? Yeah, it does. But is the argument vulnerable to criticism because of that? No, it's not. So if we actually understand, and this is why what I'm doing here is kind of walking you through the steps, the process for tackling these flaw questions in logical reasoning. And you want to really always think about the steps that you're following, not just like, did I get the correct answer or not, but what are the steps that you're following? And this is, I'm going to be honest, this is a relatively easy, medium easy question. But we're gonna in a moment, we're gonna look at a couple more difficult questions where these steps that we're following are going to be important. So always make sure you understand the reasoning, the argument itself, what's the conclusion they're trying to draw, and what are the premises. If they talk about reasoning or an argument, that's what they mean, conclusion and premises. And then try to take a moment before you look at answer choices and try to understand the gap in reasoning. Right. And you don't have to predict an answer. If you said, hey, what do we know about the people what do we know about these people who were in the survey? Or if you say, well, what do we know about other fabric softeners? Anything that you can think of that gives you an idea of what's wrong with the argument is going to help you when you go to look at the answer choices. All right, so these next two answer choices, Fabric Soft is much cheaper or more expensive than other fabric softeners. No, we haven't considered the price, but price doesn't really have anything to do with whether it's effective or not. All right, it's price and effectiveness are two different things. The consumers tested find the benefit of using fabric softeners worth the expense. Again, we're not worried about whether it's beneficial compared to the expense. It's just, is it effective or not? So if you understand, this is one of the reasons why it's worth taking the time to really clearly understand what does the LSAT mean by reasoning, arguments? What does it actually mean? Being able to identify the conclusion of the argument and premises. And then understanding that all these answer choices are wrong because, yeah, they're all things that the argument fails to consider, but the argument that we're looking at, the relationship between the premises and the conclusion, that relationship isn't vulnerable to criticism for any of these reasons. So we're left with our last answer choice E, echo. Did the argument consider whether the consumers had the opportunity to evaluate fabric softeners other than Fabric Soft? No, this is our problem with our argument. We don't know anything about fabric softeners other than Fabric Soft. All we know is how Fabric Soft stands up compared to towels washed without it. All our evidence is about a comparison to this stuff compared to towels washed without it. Right. So this is a pretty, not a super complicated, super difficult question. in the grand scheme of things. Not saying it's going to be easy for everyone, because you can see reasons why people would fall for all of these answer choices. They are all things that the question fails to consider. But understanding our argument, E echo is the correct answer, because this is a problem with our argument. It describes an actual problem with the argument. So these steps that we followed are the steps that you want to think about every time you answer a logical reasoning question. You're probably going to be able to answer questions without going through all these steps that I'm describing, but that's okay. Because if you practice the steps, like I don't want a bunch of different ways of answering the same kind of question, depending on whether it's easy or not, right? If the question's easy, I might go through the steps really fast. And a harder question, it might take me longer, but the basic steps, the basic thought process is the same. It's super efficient. I don't want to have to recognize that a question is difficult and then say, oh, okay, let me, dig in and use my process here. I just want to, kind of roll along through a logical reasoning section, following the same steps for every question as much as I can. There are slightly different questions depending on, or slightly different processes depending on what the question is asking, depending on the question stem. But the basic overall process is the same. So we're going to try to use the same process for all these questions we look at. Looking at another question, we'll start here. Again, this is the June 2007 test, section 2, question 21. We're going to start here and start with again, it's the same kind of question. The reasoning in the driver's argument. Okay, so we know there's an argument here. Most vulnerable to criticism. Okay, we know there's something wrong with the argument. So let's follow the steps. Let's go through those steps that we just followed and make sure you understand what the argument is. What's the conclusion, the main point here, and what's the support, the evidence for it. So I'll give everybody a few moments to look at that. So, conclusion here, again, kind of similar to the last argument. We have this word so, indicating a conclusion, indicating the main point of the argument. This is what the driver wants us to believe. Trading my sports car in for a minivan will lower my risk of having an accident. Okay, so that's my conclusion. Well, what's the support for that? Why does this driver want us to believe that? I've done some research, and apparently minivans and larger sedans have very low accident rates compared to sports cars. Oh, so it's a comparison again. Another comparison between minivans and larger sedans having low accident rates compared to sports cars. That's why trading the sports car in for a minivan would lower the risk of having an accident. This first sentence, my friends say I will one day have an accident because I drive my sports car recklessly. This is, you could call this background information. We actually would call it an opposing point, because it contradicts the conclusion, or maybe a better way to say it is the conclusion of the argument ends up contradicting this first statement. Friends say I'll one day have an accident because I drive recklessly. Conclusion, though, the thing the driver wants us to believe is that trading a sports car in for a minivan would lower my risk of having an accident. So what's wrong with this argument? Why is this vulnerable to criticism? Well, we already can see a problem. This guy drives recklessly. This person drives recklessly. Maybe they're going to drive the minivan recklessly. Maybe it's a minivan and they think they're safe, right? Oh, but I read this thing. I read, the car magazine, and it said that minivans and larger sedans have very low accident rates. So I'm just going to really step on the gas and go whipping down the highway, right? So you can see again that, this is what we see in these types of questions on the LSAT. We see a lot of damaged arguments, a lot of flawed arguments on the LSAT, a lot of arguments with problems. And, this type of question, we're talking about these flaw questions, asking us specifically to pick the answer choice that best describes what's wrong with the argument. Okay, so we've understood the argument. So we're going to read the question first. We know there's a reasoning. We got to figure out why it's vulnerable to criticism. So we got to understand what the argument is, just like we did last time. We find the conclusion, we find the support, and then you take a moment and pause before you look at the answer choices. Sorry, I just saw the question in the chat window. The C here stands for conclusion, and the P stands for premise. Yep. The C is the conclusion of the argument, and the P stands for premise. That's a good question. Let me make sure that I'm clear about that. So like I said, this is stuff we've gone over earlier, but if you guys haven't seen the previous free prep hours or weren't here for them, then I might be using some terminology that you haven't seen yet. So just go back here really quickly. And when we talked about what an argument is, the conclusion is the main point of the argument. The thing, whoever is making this argument is trying to convince you that something is true. That's what arguments are all about. Arguments are all about trying to convince you that something is true. So the conclusion of this argument is that Sam won't go to the beach this weekend. It's a prediction. The premise is the support for that. That's what makes this an argument. The reason that we're calling this an argument is because I'm not just giving you an opinion here, I'm giving you a reason to believe my opinion. So the premise and the conclusion. And this is what when an LSAT argument asks us why reasoning is vulnerable to criticism, what we're doing is debating the link between the premise and the conclusion, right? Does this premise actually support this conclusion? Should I believe this conclusion now just because of this evidence? Another way to think about this is the premise is like the evidence that you're giving in a trial, and the conclusion is like the verdict that you want the jury to reach. So does this evidence support this verdict? So this is what we're doing here. This is what we're doing with each of these questions that we've just looked at. We're finding the conclusion. What's the main point? What's this person trying to convince me of? What's this driver trying to convince me of? And then looking for the evidence that they're using. So when I put a little P, and this is what I do when I'm working on these questions myself. If I find the conclusion in an argument, I'll put a little C next to it on my paper. And when I find the premises, the support, I'll put a little P. And there can be more than one premise. Maybe Sam has to work this weekend. Sam has to work at his job on Saturday, and he hasn't completed any of his homework yet. There can be multiple premises leading to a conclusion. All right, good questions. So yeah, any questions that you have, please go ahead and put them in the chat window, and I will do my best to notice those and answer them. All right, so here, going back to our driver argument here, my friends say I will one day have an accident because I drive my sports car recklessly. Done some research. Apparently minivans and large sedans have a low accident rate. So, hey, I'm going to trade in my sports car for a minivan. That would lower my risk of an accident. Okay, so we know what the argument is. We understand the argument. This driver is trying to convince us. This driver's conclusion, the verdict the driver wants us to reach, is that trading the sports car in for a minivan will lower risk of having an accident. The evidence, the support, the premise is that minivans and larger sedans have very low accident rates. This first thing, we're not too concerned about this first thing. This is just some background or an opposing point that the conclusion that the driver is actually trying to contradict. Okay, so we're interested in the relationship between the second sentence about minivans and larger sedans having low accident rates, the relationship between that and the final sentence. Okay, so I want you to look at the answer choices. And again, we understand the argument. Now, before we look at answer choices, we take a moment and say, what's wrong with this argument? Well, the guy drives recklessly. Maybe having a sedan or a minivan and a larger sedan, maybe he thinks he's safer, so he's going to drive even more recklessly, right? We can see that there are problems with this argument. Okay, so I want you to look at these three answer choices and tell me, why don't you take a look at these answer choices for a moment and tell me what you think of them. In the chat window, if you want, you can put the number of one of these answer choices. Put the number that's next to one of these answer choices. And is it right? Is it wrong? If it's wrong, then why is it wrong? What's wrong with 3? What did answer choice 3 ever do to you? Or is that right? Is 3 the right answer? Right or wrong? What's up with answer choice 3? You can hop on the mic if you want to. You can click the unmute button down at the bottom. If you have a microphone attached to your computer, you can click the unmute button down there at the bottom left of the screen, or put it in the chat window. Anybody else? Anybody else have an opinion about any of these answer choices?
The problem with number 3, it says that the condition is necessary for doing so, which means that that the only way to like reduce his accidents would be to trade in his car for a minivan. But he doesn't really make that argument. He's just saying this is like an option for him.
Okay, so it's not necessary, it's just an option. Good, we have a debate. Somebody thinks 3 is right, and you're saying 3 is incorrect. Okay, so I'm going to start with number 1 really quick. Relies on a sample that is too narrow. And this is where we get into translating LSAT speak into, you know, an understanding of the answer choice. So what is the sample that this argument is relying on? Well, it says, I have done some research. What does that mean? I mean, does that mean this person like read one, you know, article on the internet, read somebody's Facebook post that said this, right? Or is this person like an automotive engineer and actually did research, right? So we don't know if the sample is too narrow. We don't know anything about the sample that the argument is based on. So, you know, again, what we're doing is if we look at each answer choice and try to compare it to what's actually going on in the argument, we see no, answer choice 1 here is not, we can't say the argument is vulnerable to criticism because of 1, because we don't know anything about the sample. We don't know what the sample is. Misinterprets evidence that a result is likely. So what's the evidence that a result is likely? Is it that the person having an accident because they drive recklessly? Is it low accident rates? Is that like likely to not have an accident? Or, you know, that's the evidence, right? So are we treating that as evidence that the result is certain? I don't know, maybe that sounds good, except there's nothing really certain about the conclusion, right? Notice the person saying would lower my risk of having an accident. So if we pick answer choice 2 apart here and look at each part, mistakes evidence that a result is likely. Like we don't even really have any good evidence or any evidence that looks like we're saying a result is likely. Evidence that the result is certain. Well, we don't really seem to be saying that anything's certain in the argument. So sometimes if an answer choice doesn't look good to me, but I'm kind of not, you know, not sure that it's wrong, I might do a little half eliminate. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and eliminate. I don't like answer choice 2. So let's look at this answer choice 3, the one that people have been, we've had a little debate about. This is actually using a very specific type of LSATese, LSAT speak, right? Mistakes a condition sufficient for bringing about a result for a condition necessary for doing so. This is actually, these terms, condition sufficient for bringing about a result and condition necessary for doing so, these are terms that are involved in conditional logic. Conditional logic is really important on the LSAT. If you want to do well on the LSAT, you do want to learn as much as you can about conditional logic. So I'm just going to give you a quick little kind of introduction here or quick overview of conditional logic. Very fast introduction. So a conditional statement is an if-then statement. If I am in New York City, then I am in the USA, right? And the then here on the LSAT is very strong language, very, very strong meaning. It means must be true. If, you know, it's not like, oh, you know, I'll go to the movie if my friend goes. You know, if my friend goes to the movie, then I'll go. If I say that in everyday language, you think like, oh, well, you know, maybe you won't. But on the LSAT, it means it will happen, right? This is definite. Then I am in the USA. And these geographic examples are good because they you know, they're things that you can relate to in the real world. So, and we'll use this little shorthand sometime to signify this if-then relationship. So we call the first part, the if part, a sufficient condition because being in New York City is sufficient to make it true that I'm in the USA. I don't have to be in New York City and on Fifth Avenue. I don't have to be in New York City and having a slice of pizza, which is what I normally do when I go to New York City. All I have to do is be in New York City to guarantee that I'll be in the USA. So what answer choice 3 is describing is a very specific conditional logic flaw that you'll see, in everyday life and on the LSAT. So I can't say that if I'm in the USA, then I am in New York City. That's not correct. It's called an illegal reversal, is what we'll often call it at Manhattan Prep in our courses and in our books and stuff. It's faulty logic, because right now I am in the USA, I'm in North Carolina, but I'm not in New York City. So again, we call the first part, the if part of a conditional statement, that's the sufficient condition. Being in New York City is sufficient to guarantee that I end up in the USA. USA is the necessary condition. So that's the sufficient condition. And then being in USA is the necessary condition. So if I'm in New York City, it is necessary that I'm in the USA. So what an answer choice like 3 is describing, and you'll see these answer choices very frequently on the LSAT, mistakes a condition sufficient for bringing about a result. So the condition sufficient for bringing about a result is being in New York City. That's sufficient to bring about the result of being in the USA. Mistakes that for a condition necessary. So it's mistaking it for a condition necessary, that I have to be in New York City if I'm in the USA. That's the error, the flaw. This error up here is the flaw, the error being described by answer choice 3 here. And it's very commonly an answer choice, or something you'll see very frequently in the answer choices to flaw questions. It's not what's going on in this argument, though. We're not making that kind of flip-flop, like, if I buy a minivan, then I'm going to have a lower chance of having an accident. So if I have a lower chance of an accident, then I'm buying a minivan. It's not, we don't have that kind of relationship going on here. So answer choice 3 is incorrect. That's why answer choice 3 is incorrect. Rachel, your explanation was good. I just want to give a little bit of a more specific explanation. I thought a little bit more of a specific explanation would help, because again, that is such a common type of answer choice. Do you guys have any questions about answer choice 3 and why it is incorrect? Or that explanation that I just gave about sufficient and necessary conditions? You guys good with that? I mean, okay in the chat window. Or if you have a question, let me know. Okay, awesome. So again, breaking these answer choices down into individual pieces. One of my favorite, I don't know if it's a joke, if it's a saying, what you want to call it, but maybe you've heard this before. How do you eat an elephant? One step at a time. I messed up the joke. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. That's the way you want to deal with difficult answer choices on the LSAT that you find confusing or difficult. Don't try to absorb them all at once. You got to break them down piece by piece. Excuse me. So like answer choice 4, relies on a source. Okay, so what is the source that this argument relies on? Well, doing some research. That's the source of the information that the argument relies on. Probably not well informed. Well, how do we know that? This person may not be a very safe driver, but do we know they're not well informed? No, we don't. So, does the argument rely on a source? Yes, it does. Is it a source that's probably not well informed? No, it's not. So again, what we're trying to do, translating these answer choices, these kind of abstract answer choices, and what I mean by abstract or vague answer choices is that none of these answer choices actually talks about anything that's going on in the argument, right? None of these answer choices talk about cars or minivans or sedans or getting in an accident. They're all using this abstract, vague language. And what I'm hopefully showing you here is the way to understand the language when you see it in answer choices, this LSAT speak, this vague language, and how you can take these statements and try to connect them to what is going on in the argument and see whether the answer choices match or not. So none of these answer choices match. None of these answer choices actually describe a reason why the argument is vulnerable to criticism. They're all incorrect. So what is the correct answer? Answer choice A here infers a cause from a mere correlation. What does that mean? So this is actually a very common pattern of reasoning on the LSAT. Notice what my evidence is, my premise that we were talking about here. Notice what the actual evidence is. Minivans and larger sedans have low accident rates compared to sports cars. Does it say why? Do we know why minivans and larger sedans have very low accident rates? Well, maybe they're safer. Maybe they're built better. Maybe they're, I don't know, like it could be that the minivans and larger sedans are somehow safer than sports cars. Or it could be something else. It could be that people who already drive more safely prefer to drive minivans and sports cars. So, you know, that's what a correlation is. A correlation just says two things happen together. Driving a minivan or a larger sedan happens often to take place at the same time as having low accident rates. But this evidence, this premise, this statement doesn't tell us why. It doesn't tell us anything about why. Notice that the conclusion is about one thing causing another. It doesn't actually say cause, right? But it says would lower my risk. So trading my sports car in for a minivan would cause me to have a lower risk of having an accident. And so we're inferring, we're drawing a conclusion about a causal relationship, about having a minivan causing lower risks of accidents based on a correlation. Now, if you've been preparing for the LSAT a little bit and you're familiar with this idea of correlation versus causation, it's a classic reasoning error. Evidence, a premise or evidence about a correlation, two things happening together, does not allow us to make a conclusion, doesn't prove a conclusion that one thing causes another. So it's a very familiar pattern. If you were familiar with that pattern and you recognized it in the argument when you read it, when you saw this argument, you recognized, oh yeah, that's correlation versus causation. It's a causal reasoning error. Then answer choice A would have looked really good right off the bat. But even if you didn't, and this is such a common thing on LSAT questions, logical reasoning questions, you don't have to understand correlation versus causation error in order to get this question correct. And this is one of the reasons why, we've been talking about these steps in your logical reasoning process. So the first step is always read the question stem first. Make sure you understand what your task is. What is your job? What is this question asking you to do? If they're talking about an argument or reasoning, then you need to understand what the argument is, understand what the conclusion is, and understand what the support is, the premises, the evidence, premise or premises, the evidence. And then, try to take a moment before you look at answer choices and understand what's wrong with the argument. See what pops into your head. Do you recognize something wrong with the argument? And then the last piece of the puzzle is when you go and look at answer choices, we call it working wrong to right, process of elimination. Eliminate the wrong answers first. Like when I look at answer choices, all I care about is it wrong? I would read answer choice A, and it might, because I've done a bunch of these questions, a bunch of logical reasoning questions on the LSAT, I would look at answer choice A and go, oh yeah, I'll bet that's the right answer. But I'm not going to select it. I'm going to skip it, defer, wait, just ignore it for a second. Leave it alone. It'll still be there in 10 seconds when I'm done with the rest of this. I'm going to look at the rest of the answer choices and I can confidently eliminate them. I know these answer choices are wrong. Okay, great. I've eliminated these four. I know answer choice A is correct. Go back, take another look at it. Yep, it's my correct answer. And this is an important process because you can get to the correct answer on any question, any logical reasoning question. You can get to the correct answer by recognizing that the other four answers are wrong. And the LSAT is really good at giving you answer choices that you may not recognize as correct at first. So this is when we talk about translating LSAT speak, interpreting answer choices. It's just the ability to look at an answer choice and break it down into pieces and look at what's going on in the answer choice and see if you can connect that to what's actually going on in the argument. If you can't, then you eliminate the answer. If you can, then you'll see that an answer is correct. All right, any questions about this? How we doing? How we doing here? Any questions about what we looked at here with question 21? So let's go let's do this. If you have a question, you can drop it in the chat window. I'm going to give you guys another one to work on. So I want you to try and follow the steps that we just followed. Okay. If you've been prepping for the LSAT for a while, is there anything here that you're not doing? Any steps that you're kind of skipping over or not really clear about? You know, are you really understanding what the argument is when you read one of these questions? They're telling you there's an argument. Do you really understand what is the conclusion of the argument? What is the support? Can you take one of these little paragraphs they give you and break it down like we just did? Once you do that, are you taking a moment to think about what's wrong with the argument? Are you taking a moment to debate the argument and see if just in your own head, in your own words, you can spot what's wrong with the argument? Are you doing that? And then when you look at the answer choices, are you looking for the right answer? Because that's the way we're programmed to take tests, right? It's the way we, you know, somewhere along the line, we probably learn how to take tests this way. You read the question, you go look for the right answer. And the people who create the LSAT know that, and they will use that against you in a lot of different ways. So it's much more effective when you look at the answers. So look for wrong answers. Look at each answer and see if you can eliminate the answers that are incorrect. See if you can spot the incorrect answers and eliminate those first. And then if you have any answers remaining, just narrow it down and look at any remaining answer choices. If you have 2 remaining or 3 remaining, narrow it down and look at those. And in fact, when you're doing this, you know, here when we're doing these free prep hours and you're looking at these questions, if you have a piece of paper with you, write down A, B, C, D, and E on your paper as we look at these questions. Because I want you to be able to like cross answer choices off as you look at them. Or if you maybe think an answer choice is wrong, you could even give it like a half eliminate. I'm not really sure C is wrong. I'm not going to eliminate it all the way, but I'm going to like halfway cross it off. That can be useful because, you know, if I'm down to 2 answer choices, if I eliminate 3 or 2 answer choices and I kind of half eliminate one, and I'm not really sure, down to 2, B and C, but I kind of half eliminated C, I'll take a closer look at them, but you know, you got to be willing to guess and move on sometimes. So I might be willing to, if I had to, just guess B because I kind of don't have a good feeling about C here. So, you know, practicing this process of elimination, practicing this wrong to right evaluation of the answer choices, it's just the most effective way to approach these questions, and will do good things for your score and improve your speed too. Right? So think about these steps that we just discussed and think about which ones you may or may not be doing. And I want you to take your time with this next question and don't just go rushing through it, but see if you can follow each of these steps. Read the question stem first. Read the little question they ask you. It's going to be the same type of, you know, spoiler alert, same type of question we've been working on so far. But get in the habit of reading that first. Then read the argument. Make sure you understand the argument. Pause for a second. Try to debate the argument yourself, and then look through the answer choices and eliminate the answers that appear wrong to you. All right, here is the question, the next question. If you come up with an answer, if you have an answer that you think is correct, go ahead and put it in the chat window. All right. So got a couple answers in. So let's go through this quickly. Hospital, we read the question, the hospital's executive's argument. So we know there's an argument. They're asking us why it's vulnerable to criticism, vulnerable to an objection. Okay, so what's wrong with it? So our conclusion, in light of this testimony, we should, so it's a prescriptive conclusion, saying something should happen. That's an opinion. We don't know if it actually should happen. We should make the protection of our clients' confidentiality our highest priority. So in a couple things indicating that this last sentence is a conclusion. It's saying about something that should happen, but in light of this testimony, in light of this evidence, in light of this premise, so that tells us that what came before, what we just read, was testimony, evidence, premise. So, okay, what is the premise? What is our support? Several computer experts maintain that the most significant threat faced by large institutions is unauthorized access. So we have these experts saying that unauthorized access is a problem. That's our premise. That's our evidence. Conclusion, we should make the protection of our clients' confidentiality our highest priority. Okay. Rachel, I'm going to put you on the spot again, since you've been helping out a lot tonight. Did you, when you first read the argument, did you take a moment to try to think about what was wrong with it? First of all, do you agree with what I'm saying is the conclusion here and what I'm saying is the evidence? And then did you immediately see anything wrong with the argument or not?
Yes, I agree. The conclusion and the premise,
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Those are accurate. Reading it, seeing that a hospital executive said that the protections of clients' confidentiality should be the highest priority it sounded odd to me, because I would think a hospital would have bigger issues than that.
Like saving people's lives, maybe?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good, right? So yeah, and I like that, right? Normally, we don't really worry too much about who's making the argument, right? Like, so it could be like physics professor. That's what you'll see often. Like physics professor says whatever, and you might be thinking, "Oh, I hate my physics professor. The one I have this right now is such a jerk." That's not a reason to debate the argument. But in this case, you're seeing a potential problem with the argument. Our highest priority, and it doesn't matter whether you related this to the person making the argument or you just said, "Well, wait a minute, highest clients confidentiality, highest priority." What about, maybe other things for whatever triggered this, maybe other things are going to be a higher priority, right? So, correct answer choice could say just that. Perhaps X is a higher priority, right? That would be an objection, is a higher priority than client's confidentiality. I'm curious, Rachel, I'll put you on the spot again one more time, if you don't mind. Were any of these, as you looked at the answer choices, what did you think of these answer choices as you looked at them? Were you looking at them and evaluating or trying to find things wrong with them? Or did just one of these answer choices jump out at you as the correct answer?
A couple of them, didn't really seem to address the argument, I guess. With A, it didn't seem like that the problem was kind of listed there. They weren't really looking for different solutions to that problem. They weren't trying to find the appropriate solution to that problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what are the causes? Are we talking about the causes of a problem in the argument? What are the causes of the problem in this argument, Rachel?
I guess that universities and hospitals have unauthorized access to confidential data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could kind of say that, but I would almost say that's just the problem, right? That is the problem. We don't even know what's causing the problem. So I would be really skeptical. I don't think they talked about the causes of the problem. Appropriate solutions, I guess they're talking about a solution, making the protection highest priority. That's a solution maybe. So I kind of see how there's a solution. I'm not sure if there are causes. And then Does the argument confuse the two? Is the argument have a problem because it's confusing those two? No, that's not what's wrong with this argument. Any other answer choices that you found that you had a problem with, Rachel?
I get, as well as C, it seemed like there was no evidence that like there was a correlation between anything really.
Yeah, like what two things are happening at the same time? It's not like our last argument where we had like driving a minivan or a sedan and having a lower risk of accident, right? And then what's the, what are we trying to say? Are we claiming that one thing is causing another? There's no causal claim in the conclusion. We're not saying, it just says, hey, we should do this. It's not saying, therefore, I don't know, access to confidential data is causing us to lose money or anything like that. So yeah, again, we can relate these answer choices. We can look at each piece of these answer choices, assumes a correlation between two phenomena. What's the correlation between two phenomena? We're not really talking about in this argument. Evidence that one causes the other. Where are we talking about one thing causing the other? So, you can look at these answer choices and kind of pick them apart piece by piece. And some of these answer choices, you'll just be able to say, no, that's not even happening in this argument. The argument draws a general conclusion about a group. Okay, protection of our client's confidentiality. I mean, maybe that's the group. Maybe the clients is the group based on data about an unrepresentative sample. I mean, do we know that the evidence is unrepresentative? Like, we don't know that. I mean, the thing about an answer choice like D is you have to make a whole bunch of assumptions to say, the best you could say is, well, maybe it's unrepresentative, but that's like, you got to add your own details to the story. We're not going to do that, right? We're not going to do that. We're just going to take the answer choice as it's written and say, is this a problem with this argument? The argument infers that a property belonging to law. So infers, concludes. That's what infers means in logical reasoning. Concludes that a property belonging to large institutions. Okay, what's the property belonging to large institutions? I guess unauthorized access to confidential data belongs to all institutions. We're not really talking about all institutions here. We're talking about this one institution, I guess, this one hospital. So, sure, we're talking about large institutions, but all institutions, no. So notice the things I've crossed out here in these answer choices are very, very specific details that either just don't match up with what's going on in our original argument up here. Either they just don't match up, or even if these specific things are mentioned, the argument isn't doing what the answer choice says it's doing with these specific details, right? We're not confusing the causes of a problem. We're not saying that a property belonging to large institutions belongs to all institutions. We're not doing that. The argument isn't doing that. So again, even if answer choice B didn't jump out at you as great, I'm going to be honest, I haven't looked at this question in a while, and I just looked at it, earlier today when I was getting ready for this session. And the first time I looked at answer choice B, I didn't think it was the right answer. It didn't seem that great to me. But I eliminated A, C, D, and E. I knew they were wrong, for the exact reasons that we're looking at here on the screen. So knowing that these answer choices are wrong, like B is all that's left. I take another look at B. Argument relies on the testimony of experts whose expertise is not shown to be sufficiently broad. I mean, they're computer experts, right? But what kind of computer experts? Are these like the Geek Squad guys at Best Buy? Like, do they really know anything about large hospitals? So B isn't a great answer, but there's nothing wrong with it. The expertise, because it's correct. It's not, notice that B isn't saying, hey, these guys stink, these experts stink, they don't know anything about computers. It is accurately describing what's going on in the argument. It's true, the expertise is not shown to be sufficiently broad. We don't know anything about these so-called computer experts. We don't know anything about them. So, does B immediately stand out as a great answer the first time I look at it? No. but all the other ones are clearly wrong, and there's nothing wrong with B. It could be a possible problem. It's not the one I predicted, but it could be a possible problem. So B, Bravo is correct. So, all right, these free prep hours always go so fast. But we got a chance to look at a few questions, and hopefully what you're seeing here is the things I'd like you to take away from this that I'm hoping you'll take away. Some ideas about your process, some ideas about the steps that you're following. And maybe these questions weren't incredibly difficult for you. If they weren't, that's great. Then these are, I would say, not the most difficult questions on the LSAT, but certainly they weren't all super easy. But hopefully what we illustrated here were some things that you can implement into your steps that you're following when you're answering these types of questions. And think about some takeaways. Think about some things that you want to incorporate into your process, whether it's, always reading the question first. Make sure you're clear on what your job is for this one particular question. Make sure you understand what an argument is. When they talk about an argument, when they talk about reasoning, make sure that you understand what that is and what that actually means. And take a moment, pause, think for a moment about what's wrong with the argument before you look at answer choices. You might not be able to come up with anything, but if you do, and with practice, by practicing this, you will get better at just recognizing a potential problem with the argument that may or may not be what the answer choice ends up relating to, but at least, it helps you prepare for the answer choices as you read them. And then work wrong to right. Take that as a big takeaway from today. Not diving in and looking for the right answer choice, because the right answer choice or the correct answer doesn't always look great the first time you look at it. But going through the first time you look at answer choices and just looking for answer choices that are wrong, figuring out which answer choices are wrong, eliminating those. And then if you have more than one remaining, take a look at those answer choices, the remaining ones, and decide between the two of them. And again, a big part in these flaw questions that we looked at, a big part of it is being able to translate this abstract language, this vague the vague language that they use in the answer choices. These statements in the answer choices that don't really relate directly to anything happening in the argument, in that little paragraph they give you. Being able to take those vague answer choices and just look at them piece by piece and see if you can relate the things being talked about in each answer choice to what is actually happening in the argument, and then see whether the answer choice is correctly describing what's going on in the argument. That's being able to interpret LSAT speak, being an LSAT speak interpreter. All right. So thank you all very much for being here this evening. What I'll do is I can stick around for a few minutes, and if you have any questions about the LSAT or anything else, I'm happy to answer them. If not, then, thanks for being here, and hopefully we will see you again for an upcoming session. Like I said, we do these free prep hours a couple times a month. I just put a couple of links in the chat window, so if you're interested in some of our other free resources besides these free prep hours, you can go to our Manhattan Prep website and check those out. If you want to see a list of upcoming classes and attend session 1 of a class for free to see what our classes are all about, you can check that out. And if you're going to take off, then again, thanks for being here. Have a good night. Good luck with your LSAT prep. Hopefully we'll see you back here again sometime soon. All right. You're very welcome. Thank you for your help tonight.